Hey, look at that. Okay, so as I was saying, my name is Rob Boldin. I'm the Director of Artistic Operations here at Pittsburgh Opera. I know many of you, so it is so lovely to see you. For those I don't, hopefully we can cross paths sooner than later. I want to thank all of you for taking some time out of this Sunday. In some ways, although it's nice to be in person, in some ways, due to the bitter cold, it's nice to be able to do this so we can all enjoy this from the comfort of our own home with a cup of coffee or your beverage of choice. So thank you all for being here. And thank you to the Friends of Pittsburgh Opera, the FPO, for sponsoring these types of events. I see many of you on this Zoom, but just to highlight a few of, so they sponsor the Opera Up Close as well as a few other upcoming events that I just want to cite before we move on. We have, of course, we have Opera Up Close for Carmen, March 13th. We have the FPO Speaker Series, March 20th, featuring Christopher Hahn, talking about what goes into the planning of a season. April 4th, we have our fashion show, the FPO Fashion Show, which has quickly become a highlight of the Pittsburgh event scene. Always fun, always crazy, should be a great evening. And then on Sunday, April 10th, we have another Opera Up Close for our final production of the season, Blue, where we should be featuring librettist and director Caswell Thompson, who will be joined by what we're hoping many leaders in the community, from law enforcement to government to perhaps the clergy, to discuss this work, to discuss Blue. We're very much looking forward to that. A couple of bits of quick housekeeping, some of which we did a second ago, but again, feel free to be on or off camera, but I just ask that you mute yourself. I will be happy to do so if you don't happen to hit that button, no worries. I encourage speaker view, but it's not required. You can be in any view you want, but speaker view will make the person talking a lot bigger. Some of the examples and pictures and photos that we show a lot bigger, more prominent. And then if you do have a question, throw it in the chat. You can do it privately to me, but if it happens to go to the whole group, not to worry. We are not, this format is not sacred, and I will get to as many as I can along the way. So I will kick off the chat and just put in my email address. So that is not who to send it to, but if you have questions after this presentation or comments, you are more than welcome to email me at that time. So that's in there. So check the chat from time to time. I will throw other links and things in there that I think might be important or interesting, or both. So to the matter at hand, In a Grove, Pittsburgh Opera's third world premiere. We are incredibly excited to launch this production. This is a co-production with Los Angeles Opera, a commission that they started that we are thrilled to be able to present, and very excited to yet again add to the canon of operatic works that exist out there. So one might ask, you know, why do a world premiere when you only have a handful of slots to program? Why do something brand new that you don't know, that you've never heard, that's untested, untried? And I would ask less why, but more importantly, make the point that we can, as an opera company. At Pittsburgh Opera, we do have that ability. We do have those slots, and it's a true privilege within the framework of this industry, within the framework of this art form, to be able to continue to offer new works into the world, shepherd them, bring them to light. Because if you're not, then you do run the risk of just curating old pieces. And this is a living, breathing art form that we want to be contributory to, as well as a historic art form that we want to honor. So having the ability and production slots to engage in and present world premieres is a complete privilege as a producer. So I say that as a framework for where we are and the fact that we do get to do this, this piece. This piece in a grove, based on a short Japanese story by the author Akutagawa. And I'm gonna say this, but then my three guests will certainly elaborate further on this. In a nutshell, it surrounds a single incident, but described and talked about through multiple perspectives over the course of the story. Some might say slightly allegorical for our times, perhaps, but a fascinating look at what one thing happens, and all of these different perspectives come into view, come into light, get shared, and we all have to walk away going, what is the truth? What really happened? And that's kind of the beauty of this piece. So I'm going to actually pause on any more description there, because I'm going to let our creators and our director, I'm going to bring them on, because they're going to have far more depth and perspective about this that I want to make sure that we share with all of you. So I am thrilled to be able to have with me today the librettist, the composer, as well as the director. Librettist Stephanie Fleischmann, a playwright, a librettist, and no stranger actually to Pittsburgh opera audiences. You may remember The Long Walk that we presented a few seasons ago that was based on Stephanie's libretto. We were thrilled to present that heart-wrenching piece, but an amazing piece of theater that we were thrilled to bring to Pittsburgh Opera. About her, critics say, each song is a meditation on a moment. The moment is drawn out, lengthened, examined, illuminated, somehow made more beautiful by being looked at so carefully. I love that quote. Sorry, Stephanie, I hope that doesn't embarrass you. I found that and I loved it. Christopher Cerrone, our composer du jour, in my words, has an amazing outside of the box compositional style. If you know Chris's work, one of the biggest things that he has sort of given to the world was Invisible Cities, based also on the piece of literature of the same name by Italo Calvino that premiered in Los Angeles a few years back. A mammoth work, very much outside of the box. And about his music, critics write, for Cerrone, music is a textural and rhythmic playground with few rules and zero limitations. His clarity of intent bringing integrity to every phrase. That was by the Sydney Morning Herald. I love that. And the more I have gotten invested in Chris's work, the more I find that to be incredibly true. And last, but certainly not least, our shepherd for this piece, the woman who was realizing the words and the music of these two great collaborators, these two great artists, Mary Birnbaum. We are thrilled to have her in our midst for this production. Critics, the New York Times has said about her, Rape of Lucretia, the result is a viscerally overwhelming performance of an intimate work. And about her, Eugene Onegin, this is a different kind of Onegin, more personal, raw. And that I have seen of Mary's work in the rehearsal room and her process, those sound bites hold very true to the way I've seen her work and what I believe she is going to bring to this work and how she's going to cull it and bring it to life on the stage. So thank you to the three of you for being here, for taking a moment out of your Sundays. Very thrilled about having you here with me today. And I want to jump right in. And as we were talking a little bit prior to jumping on the Zoom, the three of you have been very much integrated into this work for so very long. So as our participants sort of watch this conversation unfold, you'll notice that there's probably going to be some finishing of sentences, of thoughts, of things like that. But I'm going to kick things off and pitch it over to Stephanie, because I would love to hear a little bit about, we know it's based on a short story by Akutagawa, but that process of taking it from that story to where we are in the libretto and the current setting, because it is not set in it's not in a Japanese setting any longer. It's been moved, it's been brought forward in time. So I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that process and where we are.
Sure. The first thing that happened was Chris found the story and brought it to me. And then we both sort of looked at the story, and I kind of put it through my processor, and there is a translation. There are multiple translations. Akutagawa is like the Shakespeare, really, like sort of more contemporary Shakespeare of Japan. His language is, and that particular story is incredibly elliptical and challenging. And so one can't imagine that the translations are going to actually capture the language. But what I did was put a translation through a filter to make it sing in English. And that was just a very basic, because it's so short. The story is 7 testimonies and it's like 7 or 8 pages. And so it's not that we initially reconceived. The reconceiving of the story kind of came later. And actually it's still completely based on the structure of the original story. And then when Mary came on board, that is when we actually started shifting the setting. So I feel like we should just open it up to both Mary and Chris at this point.
So Chris, can I back up and throw the question to you? Where and when did you find this story, and why then did it catch your attention and you go, this is an opera?
Yeah, no, it's funny because there was a very, very specific sort of idea that isn't almost all the original ideas are gone, but their remnants are still kind of lingering in the shadows of the work we have now. And sort of the original I had come out of this production, Invisible Cities, which Rob mentioned, which as the thing that's strange and unique about it, amongst many other things, is it was done in an immersive setting in a train station where the audience was on headphones. And so this was a really innovative production, and I could say that was innovative because this was not my doing. This was the company called The Industry, and it was a really exciting thing, really out of the box, as Rob said. But there was one problem, which is that there is not an apparatus for remounting operas done in train stations. And so one of the unfortunate things is that, as exciting as it was, it hasn't had as much of a life subsequent to the premiere as I would have liked, despite its pretty widespread success. And so my thought was like, how do I make a piece wherein perhaps we take some of the elements from this first work that was so successful, but make them mountable in the context of a kind of, can we make an opera? Oh, I'm being told my volume's not loud enough, so let me just put myself up. Is that better? Yes. How do we make an opera that uses some of the kind of immersive and strange elements that were part of Invisible Cities, and mount them in the context that a company, perhaps let's say an adventurous one like Opera Pittsburgh, could do. So this was sort of my starting point conceptually for the project, and I had been rummaging. Something I really loved about the way Invisible Cities worked was that it was working with fundamentally shifting perspectives, because where you stood in the space affected what your perspective was. And I thought, can I imagine a work of opera where the notion of shifting perspective is at the core of the work? My initial interest was actually the novel As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, who's one of my favorite writers. And as I sort of explored that work, I decided that it's a masterwork, but I don't think it wanted to be an opera, and it's very long and it has like 50 characters, and I'm just like, we can't possibly do this. But in my research, I had read that the inspiration for Faulkner's novel was in fact this short story In a Grove by Akutagawa, and I, of all strange people, had not seen the movie Rashomon, which also famously adapts the story. So I got to this story and I thought it was extraordinary, and I thought, basically you want to start with a little bit and it expands out because music slows down words. And so, but I knew that the other things that I had written my own libretto for Invisible Cities, and I knew that I just wasn't up to the task of doing this. And I had been set up on a kind of composer librettist date, if you will. We were match made by a dramaturg named Corey Ellison. And so Stephanie and I were talking, and I just was like, you want to do this? And, she said, let's do it. And the original idea for the piece has changed quite a bit since then. But this basic idea of shifting perspectives, and what I found so appealing about it is honestly that, the story is a story that repeats over and over again. I'm like, what repeats over and over again? Oh, music, sonata form, theme and variations. All this stuff seems so fecund for music. And I think that the question of why should this become an opera is one that is not actually taken seriously enough a lot of the time. And people think, oh, it should be an opera for this reason or that reason. And most of the time, I don't happen to agree with them. But in this case, I thought this story really wanted to be an opera because it dealt with a kind of using music as a way to enhance and actually and tell the story. I want music to tell the story, and if music isn't telling the story, then you're slowing down the story with arias and instead of enhancing the story. And so that was the basic idea. And then from there, I think just our lives wove its way into the work that it became more American. It began dealing with issues of feminism that I think are time immemorial but more present in our lives than they were in 1922, and giving our female lead something more substantive to do. And so and this is basically what's growing. And so then basically somewhere along the road, Stephanie and I have been kind of working on this on and off for a few years, and I think at this point Pittsburgh Opera had agreed to co-produce it. And actually I see Raleigh Marcus is on this call, and she is one of the people who had supported the work early on. So we had a little bit of a kind of kernel of a production, and so then we called, we knew we needed a director, and so we searched high and low and found Mary Birnbaum as, again, this kind of, I think we all have a mixture of really standard classical training and experimental theater training. And so we met Mary. She came in, had lunch with me, was apparently very nervous, although I was insanely impressed with her and was nervous as well. And she said some really smart things, and we're like, this has got to be the person who helps us do this opera. And she's really been the third, she's the George Martin of our team. She's not an official writer, but she is an unofficial writer of the opera.
I appreciate that more than you even know. I think Chris and Stephanie have said most of the things, but I would add that when I spoke with both of them about the intent of the piece, they were very clear on this idea of that they wanted it to represent the prismatic nature of truth. And when I first read a draft of the piece, some of the details of the original story got in the way of the form that they were so interested in. So moving this piece from Japan, from a mountainside in Japan, to a forest in Oregon, helped for me bring the details closer to home so I could be more impressed by the form and the shifting nature of truth and the perspectives. I guess other than that, something that's really fantastic about the way Chris and Stephanie have worked together is exactly what Chris just pointed out, that our lives have made it into this piece, and each one of the characters, the three protagonists who are involved in this murder that's at the center of the piece, have become much more dynamic and differentiated from the original story, I think, in this retelling than you would find on the page. They're much more archetypal in the short story. And I think Stephanie has dimensionalized each one of them so that we really have empathy for the three of them, which is different, I think.
Can I ask, can we back up? Can we unwind just a little bit? And Mary, I'd love if you could just give us, what's the elevator overview of this piece? Like, what's the plot? What are we looking at? And you're all welcome to certainly dovetail one another, but since we're with you, Mary, do you want to kick it off and kind of give us, what is this about?
There is a murder that has taken place in a grove off the Foundry Post Road. A body is found by a woodcutter. He doesn't know whose body this is, but it's the body of a man, and he's been stabbed, or he has his chest is struck through. This is a very important detail. We then hear from a priest who passed that man and a woman who was on a horse earlier that day. They seemed like they were going somewhere. We then hear from a policeman who has caught a possible suspect, a bandit named Luther Harlow, who he's been after for quite some time, and he possibly is responsible for a spate of women gone missing on the mountain. We finally hear from the mother of the woman that the priest passed, who says her daughter is still missing. The space shifts, and we hear from the three protagonists in the main story. The bandit, aforementioned bandit, Luther Harlow, who tells us that he killed the man. And he killed him because he actually wanted to assault his wife. But in the middle of this assault, the wife escaped from him, and he and the man got into a knife fight, and he stabbed him. We then hear from the woman who says she killed her husband. After the bandit left, she was going to apply a salve of herbs that she found foraged nearby. We earlier learned that she's very interested in botany, we have several sort of contemporaneous female botanists of the time. So interesting. And she's tried to make a salve, but the salve hadn't worked because in the middle of applying the salve, her husband revealed to her that he was betrayed by the fact that she actually had slept with this bandit. We know from the first account that we know that's not true, especially and then from what she says, I got away. I was not raped. But she owns his murder anyway, because she fails to apply pressure to the salve when he says, you did this to me. And she goes, wait a second, I did what? And in that split second, he dies. Finally, in an expansion of a world, sort of an otherworldly expansion, we hear from a medium, a spiritualist, who resuscitates the dead man. And he tells us the real truth, that ever since he was 3 years old, when he had rheumatic fever, he's been destined to live half a life. So he knew he was going to die in his 20s. And his heart attack, when he started to fight the man, his heart became so weak that there was no way he would have lived. So we're all called upon to question the truth tellers and to start to understand that truth is deeply personal and emotional. And we're left with, what is the truth and who was telling it after all?
Yeah. So with that, when we took what are trying to think how to phrase this question in a way, but for Stephanie and Chris and I guess Mary, because it's so hard to untether the three of you from this, knowing how integrated you've been along the way. But if there is one thing, if there's something about this piece when you were creating it, when you were putting it together, that you thought this is what we hope to achieve by creating this work, or we are hoping to illuminate X through this work, is there something within this work that you were hoping to achieve or get to or give perspective to by bringing this work to life?
Yeah, I mean, I would just repeat what Mary said, that truth is subjective, personal. It cannot be anything but colored by emotion, and that we can never really get a handle on one truth. There are always going to be multiple layers of truth, and that we can't escape that our lives are going to be always informed by that complicated truth.
Sorry.
I'm hesitant to step in here and impishly say that, to quote Oscar Wilde famously, that all art is quite useless. So I'm not sure that there has to be a goal. But in a more serious sense, I think that art is about finding a working through of life. And so, I don't know if you start with a goal, but certainly I think what happens is that it reflects I think, our kind of collective interest in documenting the world we live in. And the world that I live in is one wherein it would be very easy for me to only see things from my perspective and to curate a life wherein my perspective is the only important one, and to shut out everyone whose perspective is not mine. And I think that that is probably not good or healthy. And it's also easy. And so I think this opera tries to do the thing that is not easy, which is to see it from everyone's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
One tiny thing to add to that, so beautifully spoken, both of you. The idea that emotional harm is as impactful as physical harm, and that has been the sort of failure to connect based on your different perspectives. That has been the tragedy at the heart of this story for me, and really resonant.
Yeah, I love that. A question that came up in the chat from Mark Abramowitz. He asks, doesn't the Rashomon movie have a fourth witness? Is the woodcutter who claims to have watched the events from afar?
We have we start with the woodcutter. Actually, we actually have all the witnesses of the Rashomon movie. Stephanie and Chris, you still haven't watched it, right? Recently, yeah, they tried not to.
At first we didn't do it to kind of get our own ideas, and then I feel like it feels like a weird, superstitious thing now.
Will you watch it after we open?
Yes.
Okay.
I actually love Kurosawa. That's the irony. Ron is one of my favorite movies, but I haven't seen Rashomon.
The only thing we don't have, which is, I think it's sort of sad, but it also is just such a different piece, is the baby, Mr. Abramovitz. There's no baby, except I have a baby here, but there's no baby in our show.
Also, for the sake of rights and copyright, this original story is in the public domain, and I felt like not seeing it means that I can't use anything that might be regarded as the rights of the Kurosawa estate, as opposed to the very public domain short story that we're adapting.
Indeed, a much easier path to a new retelling, to say the least. Stephanie, when you were adapting the short story, were there parts of it that that you found trickier to work through? And obviously the short story is what it is. And were there elements of it that, or I'd love to hear a little bit about your process, maybe, in terms of that, and taking that short story and then putting it into a libretto, just out of curiosity for the group, because I think that that's a really fascinating thing to do, to take something that's already in existence and then turn it into another medium that's then going to go yet another step further and have music added to it. So I'd love to hear how you did that first step, taking that short story into libretto form.
Sure. I mean, the sort of cardinal rule of libretto writing is distillation. So that's always the first thing. And then making a text sing is a kind of very mysterious process that I can't really begin to describe, but it has to do with prosody. It has to do with the shape of the line and hearing rhythm in the language that you're choosing, pulling from the ether. But then really, once I had done a draft of, in a way, just transposing the story into my own language, the approach that the three of us took, I mean, we talked it over and over and over. This was not just me writing libretto. This was a conversation that was ongoing that had to do with questions of how do we take the sort of very Japanese cultural sort of underpinnings that have to do with shame and what happens between a man and his wife and a samurai and class, very Japanese sort of, the Luther Harlow is a ruffian. He's a low, like in the story, he's clearly a very different class than the couple on the road. But in our story, he's edgy and scary, and but they're not necessarily upper class. They come from a more, they don't have a lot of money. What the thief offers, he kind of lures them into the grove with an offer of treasure, and they need that treasure to start their lives. They're young newlyweds in a kind of a difficult moment out west. a school teacher and an aspiring botanist. So like as used, and then what is the world that they're in? What is the sort of visual, physical world? And what is the theatrical space that we want to create? That's another big question that we ask ourselves as we're talking. So if this thing is going to get repeated over and over again, which was very much what Chris contributed, was how do we have, where are the moments that we recognize, and theme and variation, and then how are those shifted ever so slightly, but how do I, as the wordsmith, basically give Chris the architecture, because his music is so architectural, that supports motifs coming back. Chris, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, like, this is a really collaborative piece, and I would say that Stephanie is most certainly the author of the libretto, and I'm the author of the music, and Mary's the director. But I feel like everyone, everyone had quite a bit to say about everyone else's work, and we're very, very collaborative. And that was one of the things, is that I was really interested in creating a circular work, a work that feels like by the end of it you're back to the beginning. And so that's very deliberately asking Stephanie to sort of think about how different words can function as motives. And since we're something we decided on, which I think is probably not dissimilar to the movie, should I ever watch it, but something, so we basically were like, well, this would be really boring if it's just someone standing there telling a story and the other characters are not on stage. And so we sort of involve the other characters. So in each scene, one of these characters is narrating the story, but the other ones enter and kind of walk through, and they do act out. And something I sort of did was, as I was working on this piece, I had this idea that that the main character, that there would be a lot of vocal electronic processing on the singers. And so I knew the piece was going to be amplified. And so one of the things that I used as a device for, and so anyway, in the libretto writing process, Stephanie very deliberately sort of has the main character talking to the audience. They're narrating, who is kind of the stand-in for the interrogation room of the jail. But the other characters come in and they sort of they help, they enact the story, the three of them. So the narrator is sort of in and out of straight narration and then acting out the show. So this is kind of I think it was, I can't remember who, it was a collaboratively made decision, but then the decision was sort of made again as it kept on getting rewritten to sort of have all these elements come back, so that when, I have these different motives, I have the kind of, I guess I'll call it the murderer motive, if for lack of a better term. It's an interval of a minor seventh. It's a major seventh. It's a dissonant interval that you'll hear come back over and over again. There's a few, and there's another interval, which is kind of the same thing. You don't need to know all this technical jargon, just like suffice it to say, when someone talks about being a murderer, it sounds the same, and so, yeah, all these elements then wind up being linked directly to different phrases, and especially as the opera goes on, you'll start to see phrases come back. And when the phrases come back, so does the music. So this kind of creates this. So that was the whole interest in architecture, because I feel like there are two complaints about contemporary opera that I have personally. I don't know if anyone else does. One is that there aren't enough tunes, and ours is one gigantic tune that keeps on coming back, which you'll see over and over again. It's a very important melody. And the other thing that I would say is, I actually sang the melody from the opera to Mary's baby last night. She's like, "Don't sing that melody, it's evil." And the other thing that I would say is that it doesn't have enough internal memory. It doesn't have enough. Opera a lot of contemporary operas just go on and on and on. And I was like, no, I want operas to be actually, one of my favorite operas is actually Waltz by Berg, in terms of contemporary operas, and it really is so structured. And so I was really I wanted this all to be about structure, and that's what the appeal of the original story was. So Stephanie very beautifully and carefully relays so many elements that keep on coming back, and they keep on coming back musically. And a big part of why that works well, in my opinion, is that you kind of know where you are because music and words come together to orient you as a listener.
I'll also say I've never been part of a process where the two of them, Stephanie and Chris, had such a simpatico understanding of each other's work, and were so clear with each other on what would work and what wouldn't, and how, and we went through every word together in meetings over the course of, thank goodness for COVID, because we had the time to sit on Zoom and really go through word for word. So it's been a total pleasure and very collaborative that way.
Well, dovetailing on Stephanie and Chris, I think it's worth jumping in to see if we can bring up some of these audio examples, because I think it'd be really interesting to hear the soundscape and Chris's world that he has sort of created here sonically. So let me see if I can share my screen. Chris was gracious enough to send along 3 clips, and I'm going to grab them sort of in succession. And then we can talk about them a little bit, talk about your soundscape, the world, and how they came to be. So let me, give me 1 second. Let me make sure that I've got them all queued up. I did at one point. There we are.
So say this is from a workshop we did in November with the singers who are starring in the opera, but just with the piano and the electronic element, but without the orchestra.
Yes, that is a good setup. Thank you. All right, let me see if I can do this, share this. Yeah. Thanks for bearing with me. All right, this is the first clip. Give me a thumbs up to make sure you can hear it.
Hegemony, hero, goldenrod. I know these things. I can help him. Crocus to blunt the pain. Ambrose, look at me. I can't. How could you? I heard, I saw nothing. You saw nothing. Storms was eyes on fire, burning for him.
I hate to stop it there, but all right, so that was the first excerpt. That was Madeline Edlinger and Andrew Turner from the workshop, who are also starring in this piece. I'm going to bring up this second excerpt for us to take a quick listen to. Grab this.
That moment, I'm like a tree, hearted cracked. What we had is gone, all the good done erased. What we had is gone, all the good done erased. Ambrose, no. A hollow round.
And then one more I want to share. Make sure I grab the right one. Bear with me, everybody. Thank you.
You should be able to skip. There's a little thing, if you go to more information, it'll show a fast link to each one.
Yeah, so let me grab this one, I think. Here's the final one.
I should have told her then. I should have told her then. But I hid her like I loved her, swept her in a storm of love and hate. Hated myself
I could keep going, but for the sake of the time that we have, we're going to pause right there. So I can imagine you all heard, obviously there were echo effects, there were things in there that probably sounded like there was a glitch in your audio on your Zoom, but in fact, these are all amazingly atmospheric things that Chris has integrated into this work. Now, I'm going to say this, Chris, before I jump into, I'd love to hear a little bit about your process, but I want to say this because the interesting thing about being a part of this piece and this work is that obviously we've been getting pieces and samples and libretti and scores, and we've gotten to know it. And when we got to the workshop, I can honestly say I finally feel like I heard what has been in your head for months, years, and it was really truly amazing, because we finally got that extra layer of this sonic world that I feel is so important, you know, not only to this piece but to your writing in general. So I would love to hear a little bit about your process, where this all started, and kind of how you got to where we are with this piece and its sonic world. It's a big broad stroke question.
Yeah, no, it's actually interesting because I have this idea of like something that it's sort of ubiquitous yet simple throughout the opera is just a reverb on the voice, which is the sound of like a kind of echoic thing, and then you have various other levels of different kinds of, simply put, echo effects. And I think the whole idea of this piece is about memory, and reverb is the memory of a sound. Reverb is the sound decaying in time. You start here and you can hear the sound over there, or the reflections of, like, reverb is the literal reflections of sound. And so I had this idea that like the piece is about reflection, the piece is a memory piece. So the one thing I wanted to do, and to kind of create this like effect, which is certainly a trance-like effect in the work, is to have this be really prominent. And so that was kind of the baseline idea for this kind of thing. And then from there, I started to use these effects as being kind of taking you in and out. Like I don't like effects for effect's sake. I like effects for storytelling's sake. And sort of a big part of this is sort of the effects have a lot to do with who is the narrator. The narrator tends to not have as many effects unless they're in the story. So in the fifth scene, this Luther character, when he's telling us the story, there's less effects on him, and then when he goes into the story, the effects come on his voice, so that it's a kind of narrational device of, are you talking to us, or are you talking to Leona and Ambrose? And so that's a big part of it. And then from there, I think it was really sort of a way of expanding the sonic world. I'm like, we all know they're going to be amplified as is, we know this, and so how can we creatively use this effect to tell the story? And like, I will say that probably the most challenging part of this, of making this piece, is just that, you have a lot more dialogue in most operas, and in this opera it's a lot of monologue, and then it comes in and out, you do have dialogue, but it's probably, 2/3 to more of just monologue, and that's actually a really hard thing to make interesting for a sustained period of time. So I was thinking upon myself of what tools can I use to ratchet it up, and what tools can I use to create further intensity, drama, variety out of these voices. And so on a simple level, it was both to create variety, but I think on a deeper level, it was there to expand beyond the what the capabilities are of our singers acoustically, and also to sort of create the world broadly, and then to create the world specifically. I mean, you saw that first little clip where Andrew has a what we call a delay on his voice. Instead of a reverb, it's like a repeating solid, the voice comes again. And it's, to me, like the moment where he reveals something himself, like the spirit comes out of his body, this kind of cruelty that he's been hiding this whole time. And in that moment, it's like the words are, she's remembering this, and the words are surrounding her again and again and again, like, this incredible moment of cruelty where he accuses her of betrayal. And so, like, we're seeing it from Leona's perspective, and so his words float around her head. At least that's the image I had in my mind. This doesn't literally happen in the opera, but I think that's what her memory is. And so, yeah, I think it was sort of a way of making memory visceral. Is that sort of the shortest way of putting it?
I love that concept. Talk about the voice parts. It is scored for soprano, countertenor, tenor, baritone. Has it always been that way, or did you play around with those voices as you were constructing the piece?
I think it was pretty much there from the beginning. I think the idea of the countertenor was a way of kind of creating an otherworldliness. So this priest, and later, I don't think I'm giving away too much, that a medium appears, and everyone is double cast. So we had this idea of double casting, which we liked a lot, which is that these cursory characters, the woodcutter, the priest, the policeman, Leona's mother, are all kind of ancillary, and our same four characters do both. And I think honestly, I had never written for countertenor, and it seemed like a really exciting idea. And then you'll see at the end, you saw this duet, and that is that Ambrose is brought back from the dead by a medium. And so I had this thought where I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if the medium and Ambrose sing in octaves, this kind of incantation. He said by himself, the medium sings, and the two of them sing together as a kind of unified meta voice. And I don't know exactly what, and I think I just got really excited about the idea of writing for a countertenor. So that was, and I had never done it before. We did do a workshop where a really lovely mezzo soprano filled in for the countertenor, and I think if there was some dire scenario where there was no countertenor available, I could see a world where that role is played by a mezzo, but then it becomes like a pants role. And so I think it was a way to get that kind of classic choir SATB effect, but knowing our characters, we had 3 men and 1 woman in the story who are primary. So that was a big part of that, because otherwise, it's funny, I was just listening to one of my favorite operas this morning, Nixon in China, and it's a really amazing piece, but one of the problems is these scenes with all these men in it, and everyone sounds the same. It's like it's 3 baritones and a tenor in that scene, and I was like, oh, you need a little bit more sonic possibility, and so that was a way of solving that problem as well.
There's also, just to chime in, because we've been talking a lot about straight tone versus vibrato, and Chris has said Baroque many times, like think of Baroque singing, and so the countertenor is an easy way to kind of drop into that Baroque simplicity, the theatricality of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it really does bring that ethereal, otherworldly quality that love mezzo sopranos, love them, but they bring a different color to the table, if you will. It really is. I'm certain. I'm being sincere when I say when we heard it in the workshop, it was like an amazing glimpse into your mind, Chris, because we had been talking about it in sort of non-specific terms, but until you really hear it. And I think that is one of the most exciting things about, coming to this piece, is that, you're going to be enveloped in this sonic world, let alone one full of a wonderful text, as well as this story that's going to unfold in you in a very different way in the GRW, those of you who are used to it. So I think it's, there's a lot of elements to this that people are going to get to discover sort of for the first time with this piece, as it's not your standard kind of come and experience as you normally would, which leads me to, I want to talk a little bit about the physical world before we, obviously I want to make sure we have a little bit of time to talk about the physical world. And so let me bring up just a few shots, a few set model shots here. Let me grab these. Share my screen. Where am I? Here we are. And Mary, once I do, I'd love for you to sort of walk us through a little bit of what we're looking at. This is one shot, and then I've got one behind it. Let me see if I can get to the other one. There we are. Can we see, is that the second one?
Indeed it is. Why don't you stay there for a second, Rob, really
Perfect.
quick before sharing, and I'll kind of call over. So this is our set. It's a really long runway that has something that we've been calling the knife, a giant sort of plexiglass panel in the middle of it. And the runway is a representation of time or memory. And so this idea of like, we start in one place, we go to the other end of the place, or do we travel backwards in time, is kind of at the heart of the story. And what's very cool about this that you can't tell from the model is that underneath the runway, there's tons of perforations in the runway, so that there's the capability of fog to come up through the runway. I was really inspired when we first talked back in the day about this piece at all. James Turrell, the light sculptor, and Fujiko Nakaya, the sculptor of fog, were two of my big references for our work here. And they both play with changes in perspective, sort of gradual shifts over a long period of time via light and atmosphere. And obfuscation, which was really important to me. So there's a lot of hidden tricks in our set. And this knife that you see actually travels through the audience risers on either side. So what starts out as this thing in the middle of the space actually starts to become like a forest, like a tree shifting in front of your eyes to the other side of the forest and back as we kind of play with where we are in the grove. Do you want to go to the other photo, Rob?
Yep, there's one right before it that has this one.
Yeah,
so this is just another perspective of the GRW.
Yeah, so we knew that we wanted audience on multiple sides of the action. And what we love about this setup is that there's an inherent understanding that there's two sides to every story. You're right across from an audience member who has a different vantage point than you do. And the other amazing thing about this set by the wonderful designer Mimi Lian, I should have said that at the very beginning, is that the runway is made of a two-way mirror. We start the piece in these interrogations. And so we wanted to make sure that the sort of forensic elements of an interrogation room were present. So we have this mirror, this plexi panel, as I just said before, and this two-way mirror, almost as if we're like looking at evidence in this murder trial. And then I think Rob has one more image to share of the current set progress.
Yes, indeed. So we've got this, and then it translates into this. So this is the real physical space. Those of you who are very familiar with the GRW and or came to see the Rose Elf will notice that the GRW is yet being transformed again. And we're, as we were with the Rose Elf, we're really excited about this. So maybe here you can talk a little bit about the knife as it's now been.
Yeah. So as you can see, the set elements are super clean, super sharp, very architectural, and that was all intentional. Mimi, the set designer's training is in. She was an architecture student, sorry. And this knife that you see hanging, I've now started to think of it like a magnifying glass, kind of going across the space, the way you would sort of see in any kind of like old dictionary or encyclopedia, something that really helps us read, but also disorients us. And there you see, obviously, the runway, and again, looking at the pattern of the floor. So it's a sort of a chemical decomposition. Again, this language of forensics is there. But what has been really interesting as I've looked at it more and more has been this sort of emergence of natural patterns like moss or fungus in the black sort of splotches on the set. So that is to say, and then there's one surprise element that I'm not going to give away. You have to come to the theater to see it. I just don't.
I didn't grab that. I purposefully did not grab.
I know. I appreciate
It's a really good surprise, though.
It is a very good surprise. Oh, the other thing you don't see here is on either side of the audience risers, there are X-rays of trees on panels that also travel alongside with this knife. And again, give us the experience of like going through a forest and trying to find like around the next tree. Is that where I was, or am I over here? So yeah.
While we're on the topic of design, let me actually pull up the three designers. There's the cast, but Juana Botez, who has put the costumes together, Yuki Link, lighting, and as Mary referenced, Mimi Lian. I have a very limited number of credits to each of them here on this this slide, but we are in the presence of incredible artists. So between the three here today, Stephanie, Chris, and Mary, and these three women, we have quite the A-team of people and artists putting this together. You'll notice Mimi Lian, I thought this was just a fun thing to share. Mimi Lian also did recently the green space at Lincoln Center, where she transformed that space. And so I grabbed a shot of that. And so that is another rendering of her work in New York, where she basically turned Lincoln Center into a green space, which was pretty amazing, pretty fascinating. So I thought I might just grab that as a reference. But there they are again. Some
Something
really
interesting maybe that people would want to know, Rob, too, is that the way Mimi worked on this piece was by sitting in this space for like an hour, just feeling the space and feeling what configuration the space wanted to be in, after she knew the story, of course. But it was a really amazing process that I have not, the way she listened to the space was really quite unique.
Oh, no, I remember when she came for a visit and was here kind of for a day, and she absorbed its energy, its feel, all of those things. And then obviously we're at this point now, but a very organic process. So it seems very foreign and very mysterious, all of design elements to me, as they would be. Let me jump up here. While we're here and sharing, just to sort of highlight our 4 cast members: Madeline Alinger, second year resident artist soprano, taking on Leona and Leona's mother; Yazid Gray, Luther Harlow and the Outlaw; Andrew Turner is taking on oh my gosh, I forget the character's name.
Ambrose Rains.
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the husband of Leona. And
yes. And the policeman. And then the priest and the medium, we welcome Chuan Yuan Liu, who is a wonderful countertenor pursuing advanced degree at CCM in Cincinnati. We are thrilled that he is with us making his Pittsburgh Opera debut. We have these 4 wonderful voices who are kind of telling this story for us on stage. So those are the 4 people we have. Let me see if there are any quick questions that came up in the chat as we are sort of rounding out and nearing the hour.
I will also say, now you guys have seen their lower faces as much as we have.
Say I've never seen Yuki's face before.
I know. Wow.
Because every time we've been on a call or in person, she's been masked. So I'm like, oh, that's what Yuki looks like.
That's true. What was this question? So this one, what are the challenges and solutions to amplifying operatic voices in such a small performance space?
Yeah, I think the challenges are probably, the singing style generally generates, so just to sort of circle back, the kind of the way for these vocal effects to work is they really don't work with tremendous amounts of vibrato. And so what is vibrato? Vibrato is basically a style of singing that is more or less evolved as a means of projection, so that, a truly astonishing thing in acoustic music is when, a singer is singing on stage, you can hear them for hundreds of feet away. And so that was a technique of singing that really was designed and evolved, as a means of projection amongst, and it can, be very beautiful. And in the context of this piece, though, it was sort of like, well, it's an intimate space. We don't really need that. And, I think another thing about it is that, with these effects, they sound quite silly with vibrato. So we needed a straighter tone, not pure straight tone. You could see there's plenty of vibrato still, but a much lighter tone. Madeline says, I'm doing 60% opera, which I was like, that sounds about right, So that was sort of, the raison-d'etre of why exactly we're using the singing style. And so I think once you're in the space and, once you're not in an acoustic space, you almost definitely want to amplify singers anyway, because it really doesn't work the same way. And so really the singing is much less loud on purpose. And so therefore it gives you more space to kind of create a soundscape in our, for the work. And so that's kind of a very deliberate decision, but they're not singing super loudly as compared to they would if they were singing more operatically.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, sort of along those lines too, the means or the reason for the amplification, if you will, is less about audio, amplifying it for distance or volume, but it is, and Chris, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more to create that ambiance, to create the world in which this piece lives, through the effects and the processing that you have built into the score.
Yeah, and also to create a kind of meta instrument between voices and orchestra, so that the line between voice and flute is very blended and blurred. And so that's a very deliberate decision to kind of create maximum I don't want to say ambiguity, maximum sort of characterization through composite colors between voice, electronics, and orchestra.
Indeed.
You know, it's just something I learned from the extremely experimental composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I would study his orchestral scores, and I'm like, oh, whenever there's like a specific moment or mood, he'll bring in the winds in a certain register. And so much about writing for orchestra, it's not just about cool colors; it's about characterization. And Mozart, being our greatest operatic dramatist, in my opinion, always knew how to use the orchestra in small shifts to create important psychological shifts in the work.
Yeah, well, I mean, I that's a great example and a great way to sort of tie in history to contemporary. I mean, Verdi's another one that, when what emotion's coming out of those characters almost before they open their mouths because of what's in that orchestration. It's amazing how that works. There is one question here that I think I can answer in brief because it's a TBD. But how will this translate to the LA Opera production? And I would say that that's a big TBD. Los Angeles Opera will have a different venue, and they will, much like we sorted things out, they will have their own challenges and ways to work through them. So, Bill, unfortunately, I don't know that I have a good answer for you on that.
I mean, we can say that it will be happening in a black box space, so that the runway, I mean, the audience and stage configuration will be the same. I mean, there may be slight adjustments because it's not exactly the same dimensions, but hopefully the intimacy
will be the same. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, the intimacy and of this piece, like this sort of concurrent epicness and intimacy, will be there in the relationship of the stage world and the audience, like it is here.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, or maybe the question is, it's not going to be a new production. This was meant to be a co-production physically, and then it'll be installed into one of their venues out there. So
yeah, they have this where a lot of their contemporary operas happen, are at this space called Red Cat, and it is not exactly like the Pittsburgh space, but it is pretty close. And so we sort of all talked about it. That was at the core of the idea for the project.
To be able to travel, to be able to install in both.
And the beautiful thing about the GRW is that it's so flexible that when we knew that both venues were going to be a thing, we planned something that would live in both spaces.
Right. That just makes sense, right? So we're at about 3:06. So we've kind of filled up an hour. So I just want to take a second to thank Chris and Stephanie and Mary in the order that I see them on my screen. Thank you for the time. Thank you for this piece. Thank you for bringing this to Pittsburgh Opera. We are thrilled to be able to present it to our audiences, and thrilled to have you in our midst as we are finding new and adventurous ways to put this on its feet every day. So thank you for for allowing us this opportunity, and thank you for taking the time to be with me this afternoon and all of these participants, whether you're in Pittsburgh or afar. As always, you people out there, you are welcome to send me an email if you have questions or comments. And I rattled off a few events coming up soon, but do check out our website, pittsburghopera.org. I would encourage everyone to check out the In a Grove page on our website. There's a really great trailer that we made where Chris and Stephanie and Mary talk about the piece, as well as a few more audio excerpts, but they delve a little bit further into certain things. Great little trailer that we put together, as well as information about the creators, links, the story, all of that. So with that, thank you so much for joining me for Opera Up Close today. And we will see you all. We'll see you all soon at the theater. Take care. Thank you. Thank you.
I left a question in chat that you didn't use.